Pittsburgh, late October. A courtroom that smells like old wood and something close to dread. A man sits at the defendant's table in a borrowed tie and a white shirt he ironed the night before. His hands are flat on the table, visible, still. Like he made a decision about stillness sometime between the parking lot and this chair, and he is not changing it now. Across the aisle, a development company worth $40 million has a lawyer who irons nothing because someone irons it for him. The door behind the bench opens, the judge walks in, and the man in the borrowed tie looks up. Something moves through his face. Fast. Gone in a second. But it was there because 3 nights ago, on a rain-soaked highway at 11 o'clock, he made a decision that had nothing to do with this courtroom. He didn't know it would lead here. Nobody did. The suit Nolan Beckett would wear to court on Monday was hanging on the back of his bathroom door. He'd looked at it 3 times already that Friday evening. Not because he needed to check on it. Just because it was there, and because looking at it reminded him that Monday was real, and that the hearing was real, and that what happened inside that courtroom in 72 hours was going to determine whether the next 14 months of his life looked like survival or collapse. He was 29 years old. He owned a beat-up Honda with 212,000 miles on the odometer, a rented 1-bedroom above a row of shops on the south side of Pittsburgh, and a garage on the ground floor of the same building called Beckett Auto. He did not own the garage in the way people meant when they said owned. He owed on the lift, owed on the bank loan he'd taken to keep the lights on through a slow winter 2 years back, and owed 14 more months on the lease before the space was fully his in any meaningful sense. 14 months, that was the number Colton Development could not wait for. Rex Colton's company had bought the block 3 months ago. Plans for a retail corridor, coffee shops, a fitness studio, maybe a wine bar if the foot traffic materialized the way their projections said it would. Clean, profitable, photographable. The kind of block that looked good in a development pitch deck. A garage did not look good in a pitch deck, so they'd filed 3 claims: excessive noise, improper disposal of industrial waste, 3 months of unpaid rent, all of it constructed from nothing. Nolan had the bank records. He had the payment confirmations with transaction numbers and transfer dates. He had photographs of the garage floor that showed clean concrete and organized shelves, and nothing that resembled an environmental violation. His lawyer, Dwight Farley, had all of it in a folder. The folder was thin, but everything in it was true. The problem was that Colton's folder was thicker, and Rex Colton had been doing this for 2 years. Dwight had found the pattern 3 weeks into the case. 6 commercial tenants in Allegheny County and the surrounding area, all on properties Colton had bought or was in the process of acquiring, all served with lease termination suits, all citing the same 3 categories of violation, the same language in the filings, the same sequence of pressure. 4 of those tenants had vacated before trial. 1 had gone bankrupt. The 6th was Nolan. He thought about the printer sometimes. The man who'd gone bankrupt. He didn't know his name. Dwight had only the case number and the outcome. But Nolan thought about him at 4 in the morning when sleep wasn't cooperating, wondering where he was now, whether he'd rebuilt anything, whether the loss had broken something permanent or just something that took a long time to heal. He didn't let himself think about it too long. He'd finished his second shift at the diner near the highway at 10:40 that night. 8 hours at the garage, then 6 more carrying plates of meatloaf and refilling coffee at a place called Mercer's that sat at the edge of a truck stop on Route 51. Both jobs because lawyers weren't free, even lawyers who charged almost nothing. Dwight had taken the case at a rate that amounted to a personal favor stretched thin across months of work, and Nolan was not going to let the man do it without being paid something real at the end. He changed out of the diner shirt in the back lot of Mercer's. Drove south on Route 51 with the wipers on full and both hands on the wheel. The rain had started around 10 and had not consulted anyone about stopping. It was the kind of rain that hit a car roof like it had a specific complaint to make. His eyes were doing the thing they did after hour 13, technically open, not exactly reliable. He was thinking about the folder on his kitchen table. About Dwight's voice on the phone that afternoon saying, "We're in reasonable shape," in the tone of a man who meant the opposite. About the specific quality of dread that had been living in his chest for 3 months, low and persistent, like a sound just below hearing. He almost missed the car entirely, black Audi, pulled halfway onto the shoulder, hazard lights going, weak and patient, the kind that had been blinking for a while. Two figures standing beside it in the downpour, woman, young, both of them completely soaked. Nolan saw them at maybe 200 yards out. His foot stayed where it was. The Honda held its speed. He watched them get closer in the headlights, one of them with her arm extended toward the road, flagging at cars that were not stopping. He passed the lights of two cars going north on the other side. Neither of them slowed. His exit was a mile and a half ahead. He had his own problems. He had enough of his own problems to fill both hands, and a second pair of hands he didn't have. He had a court date in 72 hours, and a folder he needed to read one more time before Sunday night, and a body that had been running on 6 hours of sleep and coffee for 3 consecutive days. His foot still didn't move toward the gas. And then it moved toward the brake. He couldn't have told you the thought behind it, because there wasn't exactly a thought. More like something underneath the thinking. Something installed in him early enough that he couldn't locate its origin. Something that said, "You do not drive past two women standing alone on a dark highway at 11 at night in the rain. You just don't." He braked, pulled in behind the Audi, left the engine running for the heat, stepped out into the rain, which registered its objections immediately through his jacket and shirt and skin. "Car trouble," he called. One of them turned. Blonde hair plastered flat against her face, mascara tracking down her cheeks in dark lines. She looked at him with the specific calculation of someone doing a risk assessment in real time, exhausted and wet and past the point of politeness about it. "It just died," she said. "We've been here almost an hour. Nobody stopped." He walked to the front. She popped the hood without waiting to be asked. He looked for 90 seconds, maybe less, then he lowered the hood. "Main fuse housing," he said. "Water got in through a deteriorated seal. It's not the engine, but I can't fix it here. Wrong tools for this kind of night. Can you do anything?" "Not on a shoulder in this. What I can do is get you somewhere dry." He looked at them both. The second one had not moved from the passenger side, arms wrapped around herself, watching him steadily, quieter than the first, measuring something. "There's a motel 15 minutes up the road. You can call a tow in the morning when it's light and the rain's stopped." The first one looked at the second one. The second one looked at Nolan for a long moment. Then she nodded, small and certain. "Okay," said the first. "Thank you." "Yes." They grabbed bags from the back, locked the Audi, climbed into his Honda. He was suddenly and completely aware that his passenger seat had 3 weeks of invoices on it, his back seat floor had a toolbox, and the overall interior atmosphere could charitably be described as working mechanic, less charitably as several things he didn't want to think about. Neither of them said anything about it. He pulled back onto Route 51 and headed north. The one in front turned toward him inside the first minute. "I'm Claire," she said. "That's my sister Jess." "We're twins, Nolan." She said the name back once quietly, like she was deciding if it fit. Then, "Were you coming from work?" "Second job. Diner back on the highway. I've got a garage during the day, a mechanic," she said. "Not a question. Putting it together, yeah. Is that how you knew what was wrong so fast?" "That fuse housing is a known weak point on that model. The seal around it goes after a few years and water finds any gap it can." He kept his eyes on the road, always does. From the back seat, Jess's voice came quiet and even. "How long have you had the garage?" 6 years. Started as a bay I could barely afford. Grew it from there. Do you like it?" Nobody had asked him that in a while. He thought about it genuinely for a second. "Yeah," he said. "I do." Claire shifted slightly in the seat to face him more directly. She had the energy of someone who processed the world through questions, who moved through discomfort by talking through it. "What are you doing with 2 jobs if you have a business?" He looked at the road for a moment. "I'm being sued," he said. The car got quieter in a different way. "A development company called Colton. They bought the block where my garage sits. They want me out before my lease is up, so they filed 3 claims against me. Excessive noise, waste violations, rent delinquency. None of it's real." He kept his voice flat. "Just the facts." The flat version was easier to say and easier to hear. "Hearings Monday morning. Lawyer doesn't come free, even a cheap one." Claire was looking at him now with an expression that had changed. The casual curiosity replaced by something more attentive. "But if your lease isn't expired," she said slowly, "how can they force you out? They're not claiming the lease is up. They're claiming I broke it. If the judge agrees with their evidence, they don't have to honor the contract and I owe them damages on top of losing the space." He paused. They've run this play before, 6 times in 2 years, different tenants, same claims, same language in the filings. 4 of those people left before it even got to court because they couldn't afford to stay in the fight. From the back, Jess. That's wrong, not outraged, just clear. The way someone states a thing they know to be true, yeah, Nolan said. It is? They drove in silence for a stretch. The rain was easing slightly, which it had no business doing now that it didn't matter. Claire looked out at the wet road ahead. Our dad works in law, she said. Lawyer? No, Jess, from the back. He's a judge. Nolan nodded. Lot of judges in Pennsylvania, he meant it simply. It came out that way. The silence that followed was comfortable rather than awkward. Claire turned to look out the passenger window. Then, not loudly, like she was thinking out loud more than talking to him. He's good at his job, Jess, after a moment. He's very good at his job, the way they said it. Both of them. The same careful phrasing. Told him there was a second half to that sentence they weren't saying. He didn't ask, Claire said it anyway. Not everything. Just the shape of it. The kind of thing that comes out when you've been holding it through a long bad night and find yourself unexpectedly in the warmth of a stranger's car at 11:30. Their father was in court or in transit to court or preparing for court. Most of the time, most days, he'd missed a dinner tonight. Not an ordinary dinner, as it happened, a birthday dinner. Their birthday had been 4 days ago, but they'd pushed it to tonight because Jess had an exam earlier in the week. He'd left the restaurant 40 minutes in to take a call. He'd said he'd be right back. He hadn't been right back. His phone had been going to voicemail when their car died on Route 51. Their portable battery had died sometime in the first 30 minutes of standing in the rain. Claire said, "He always means to be there." The tone of it was not bitter. It was worse than bitter. It was settled. The sound of someone who had done the math enough times to have stopped expecting a different answer. Jess added nothing to that. She didn't need to. Nolan drove. He didn't offer advice, and he didn't offer sympathy, and he didn't tell them what they should feel about it, because none of those things were his to give, and they hadn't asked for any of them. He just drove. The motel appeared on the right. He pulled under the covered entrance so they'd have a few steps of shelter getting in. Nobody moved right away. That happens sometimes. The specific quiet of a car at the end of a late night, the kind that forms when people have been honest with each other without planning to be, and nobody wants to break it before it's ready. Then Claire reached into her bag and found a portable charger. Plugged her phone in. The screen came on. "Can I get a card for the garage?" she asked. For the Audi, he found one in the glove box, slightly bent at one corner. Beckett Auto, the number, the address. She took it and read it, then she looked at him. "I hope Monday goes okay for you, thanks." Jess leaned forward from the back seat. She looked at him the way she'd been looking at things all night. Fully, without performance. "You've got a lot going on right now," she said. "And you still stopped." He didn't know how to answer that exactly, so he didn't. They got out, grabbed their bags, went through the glass lobby doors into the light. He waited until they were inside. Then he pulled back onto the wet road. The rain stopped about 2 miles later. Of course it did. He got home at 11:50. The apartment was 1 bedroom and a kitchen that was technically an extension of the main room, and a bathroom with a shower head that had 2 modes, tolerable and aggressive. He used aggressive, which was the right call after 14 hours and a soaking. Stood under it until the cold left his shoulders. Then he stood in the kitchen in dry clothes and looked at the folder on the table. Dwight's copies, his copies. The lease agreement printed out because he'd wanted to hold the actual paper. He touched the edge of the folder without opening it. He'd read it enough times to have the relevant sections memorized. Reading it again wasn't going to change what was in it. He made coffee instead. Sat at the table with it. Thought about the hearing. He had the truth. He had documentation. He had a lawyer who believed him and had done the work. What he didn't have was the kind of money that turned a thin folder into a thick one. The kind that hired specialists and consultants and people whose job was to make clean things look complicated and complicated things look clean. Dwight had been straight with him about that from the beginning. We have what's true, they have what's resourced. In a fair proceeding, those things should be the same. In practice, they're not always. Nolan had decided, somewhere in the first weeks of this, that he was not going to lose because he was afraid. If he lost, he would lose having done everything right. He would lose with the truth in his folder and his rent paid and his floor clean. He would not lose because Rex Colton called and offered him a way out, and he took it because the math scared him. He was still at the table when his body finally decided it was done arguing about sleep. He went to bed. He set the alarm for 6. He was right about the call. 6:43 Saturday morning his phone rang. He was already awake. His body had decided that 6 hours was a generous compromise given the circumstances, and had made that decision without consulting him. He was standing at the kitchen counter with coffee when the number came up. Not Dwight. Not Slade. Whose number he'd saved months ago after the first filing letter arrived, different number. Pittsburgh area code. He answered, Mr. Beckett, smooth, unhurried. A voice that had never needed to establish authority because it had always assumed it. This is Rex Colton. I hope it's not too early. Nolan said nothing. Rex continued as though the silence were agreement. I wanted to speak before Monday. Not through lawyers. Man to man before this gets any more complicated than it needs to be. A pause timed for receptivity. I've been in development for 20 years. I've seen what happens when these things go to litigation. It cost everyone, and the outcome isn't always proportional to the investment. I'd like to offer you a different path. Nolan drank his coffee. Vacate within 30 days. In exchange, I cover the remaining lease obligations, waive the damage claims entirely, and include $8,000 as a transition payment. You walk away clean. No judgment on your record, no debt to carry. Another pause, this one for effect. That's a real offer, Mr. Beckett. Nolan looked at the wall above the stove. A small scuff mark he'd been meaning to touch up for 2 years. He looked at it. I know what it is, he said. It's a fair resolution, I heard you. Rex's tone adjusted slightly. Still smooth, but with a layer now that hadn't been there before. Patience with edges. Monday isn't going to go the way you're hoping. I want to be straightforward with you about that. Victor Slade is very good at what he does, and the legal position is not in your favor regardless of what you believe about the merits. This offer protects you from what comes after a loss. Nolan put the mug down on the counter. Not hard. Just down. I'll see you Monday, he said. He ended the call. He stood there for a moment with the phone face down on the counter, not shaking. Not even particularly angry, the way he'd thought he might feel if this call came. More like something beneath anger. Something quieter and more settled. $8,000 was real money. He knew exactly what $8,000 would do for him in specific and practical terms. It wasn't nothing. It was not nothing. But accepting it meant Rex Colton got the garage not because he had a case, but because Nolan was scared. It meant the 4 tenants who'd left without a fight had company. It meant the printer who went bankrupt had been right to give up, because here was one more person who did the same. He picked up the folder from the table and opened it. He read through everything again, not because there was something new, because he needed the words in his own memory, clean and precise, so that when he sat in that courtroom, he could say what was true without searching for it. He was still at the table at 9 when Dwight called for his Saturday check-in. How are we feeling? Dwight asked. Ready, good, a pause with preparation in it. Honest assessment, our documentation is clean. Their team is larger and Slade is skilled at making clean documentation look uncertain. What we have going for us is that their evidence has gaps, and some of it doesn't hold up geographically. I'm going to push on that Monday. He paused again. They'll likely come after your character if the facts don't cooperate. That's the standard move. Be ready for it, I know. Take a breath before you answer anything. Not long. Just enough to make sure you're answering what was actually asked. Got it? And Nolan, Dwight's voice dropped a register. You have not done anything wrong. Walk in there like a man who knows that. Nolan looked at the folder. I will, he said. He spent Saturday afternoon and all of Sunday with the file. The lease. The payment records. The photographs of the garage. Dwight's notes on the pattern of Colton's prior cases. He read until he knew it all well enough to say it without notes. Then he ironed the white shirt. Borrowed the tie from Dale across the hall. His neighbor, a retired postal worker who had 3 ties in a closet and handed one over without asking why. Which was the kind of neighbor worth having. He set his alarm. Turned off the light, he thought, briefly, without planning to. About 2 women standing on Route 51 in the rain. About Claire's voice when she said he always means to be there. About Jess in the back seat saying you still stopped. He didn't know why that stayed with him. It just did. He slept. Monday, Allegheny County Courthouse. The building carried the smell of institutions that took themselves seriously. Floor polish and recirculated air, and the particular weight of paper that had accumulated meaning over decades. Nolan sat at the defendant's table in his white shirt and borrowed tie and his dress shoes that had been slightly too wide since the day he bought them 3 years ago. His hands were flat on the table, visible. He'd made a decision between parking the car and sitting down that stillness was the one thing he could fully control, so he was going to use it. Dwight sat beside him. 63, thinning gray hair, glasses he was already taking on and off. 40 years in civil law in this county. Not flashy, not resourced. Just thorough and honest and convinced his client was telling the truth, which at this particular moment felt like the only credential that mattered. Across the aisle, Rex Colton sat in a dark gray suit that fit precisely and cost visibly. He had his phone face down on the table and the bearing of a man attending a meeting whose outcome had been settled in a prior meeting. Beside him, Victor Slade organized his files with the practiced efficiency of someone for whom this was entirely routine. Neither of them looked at Nolan directly. Dwight leaned close. When they ask you something, take a breath first. Answer what they actually asked. A beat. Don't look at Colton. I'm not looking at Colton. You keep almost looking. Nolan looked at the bench instead. Then the bailiff said, "All rise." The door behind the bench opened. Judge Gerald Hartley walked in. Tall. Silver hair, slightly longer than standard. A face that had settled into seriousness over decades and seemed at ease there. He moved the way people move when they've done something long enough that it no longer requires thought. The robe. The bench. The opening of the file, Nolan looked at him. He kept looking. And then something happened in his chest that he was entirely unprepared for, which was the experience of recognizing someone he had no reason to recognize. The angle of the head, slightly left when looking down at something. The quality of attention in it, the way it made whatever was being read feel like it was being taken seriously. He'd seen that angle before, on 2 different faces in the rain. The air left him in a way that wasn't quite breath, because he knew. He knew before the man looked up, the way you know a piece of music from its first 2 notes even when you haven't heard it in years. Everything in him went very quiet. Judge Hartley scanned the first page. His finger moved down the list of names, then it stopped, stayed. And then Hartley looked up, found Nolan's eyes across the room. The recognition passed between them in the space of 2 seconds. There and gone, replaced immediately by the professional stillness of 20-something years on the bench. But it had been there, real and complete. Both of them had seen it in each other. He knew. Dwight beside him had noticed something shift. His pen had stopped. He was looking at Nolan sideways with the expression of a man who had detected a change in pressure and hadn't yet identified the source. Nolan kept his hands flat on the table. He breathed. "Be seated," Judge Hartley said. His voice did not change. Not 1 degree. The room sat, and Nolan Beckett sat at the defendant's table with the borrowed tie and the 2 wide shoes, and the one clear thought in his head, clear as water at the bottom of a cold glass. That man is Claire and Jess's father, and he is about to decide whether I keep everything I've built. The hearing began. The first 15 minutes were ordinary, which was the hardest part, the ordinariness of it. Papers shuffling, chairs adjusting, the bailiff reading the case number into the record. Victor Slade rising to deliver his opening summary in that voice of his, measured and unhurried, the voice of a man who had done this enough times that conviction was no longer required. He didn't need to believe what he was saying. He just needed to say it well, and he did. Nolan sat at the defendant's table and listened to Victor Slade describe Beckett Auto as a noise-generating, waste-disposing, rent-delinquent operation that had materially degraded the value of surrounding properties and violated its commercial lease in no fewer than 3 distinct categories. Said clearly. Said with documentation to follow. Said inside a building designed to make everything sound like settled fact. Nolan kept his hands flat on the table. He did not hide them this time. Not the way he had when he first sat down, when the shaking was real and visible, and he'd tucked them under the table so nobody could see it. That had been 40 minutes ago, before the drive over, before the parking lot, before he'd made the decision that stillness was the only thing fully within his control, and he was going to use it completely. Now his hands were visible and flat and still. Dwight took notes on a yellow legal pad. The pen moved in the careful shorthand of a man who had been writing in courtrooms for 4 decades. He didn't react to Slade's summary. No movement in his face, no adjustment of posture. Just the pen and the paper, and the slight compression of his lips that Nolan had learned meant he was filing something away for later use. Across the aisle, Rex Colton sat with his hands folded on the table, patient, still, the posture of a man who had already decided how this ended and was simply waiting for the room to catch up to his conclusion. Judge Hartley listened from the bench with his eyes on Slade and his face giving nothing. No warmth, no skepticism, no signal of any kind. Just attention, full and level and completely unreadable. Nolan had spent the first 10 minutes not looking at the bench, looking at the table, at Dwight's moving pen, at the window on the left side of the room where gray October light came in at a low angle. He'd told himself he was conserving focus, staying contained. Then he made himself look up, because not looking was its own problem. Not looking was what you did when you were afraid of what you'd find. And he had decided a long time ago, in a specific difficult year he didn't discuss anymore, that he was not going to be the kind of man who turned away from hard things. So he looked. Hartley was watching Slade, attentive, processing. That same quality of listening Nolan had noticed in the man's daughters, the kind that meant something was being received and held and examined as it arrived, not just heard. And then, without moving his head, without changing his expression by any degree Nolan could measure, Hartley's eyes shifted left, found. Nolan's held them. 2 seconds. 3 at the most, then back to slows. It wasn't reassurance. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't anything Nolan could have pointed to and named with confidence. Just acknowledgement. 2 people in a room who shared a piece of information the room didn't have yet, and both of them knew it. Then Slade finished his summary and sat down, and Judge Hartley set his pen against the folder in front of him and said, "Court will take a 15-minute recess." The room reacted, not dramatically, just the small collective adjustment of people encountering something unexpected, a shift of weight, a glance exchanged, papers that had been about to move stopping mid-reach. Slade was on his feet before the words had finished landing. "Your Honor? Is there a procedural issue the court would like to address on the record?" Nothing requiring argument at this time. Flat. Final. 15 minutes. The bailiff called the room to rise. Hartley stood and walked through the side door without looking back, and the door closed behind him with the sound of a decision being made in private. The room exhaled, not literally, but close. Dwight turned to Nolan, glasses off, which meant he was thinking hard. "In 30 years, he said, voice low, I have seen 4 unannounced recesses during opening statements. 4 total." He looked at Nolan steadily. "What do you know that I don't?" "Nothing I planned." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now." Dwight put the glasses back on, the look of a man deciding between pushing and waiting. He chose waiting. Good instinct. Across the aisle, Rex was leaning toward Slade, something tight in his jaw. Slade answered without looking up from his legal pad. Rex said something else. Slade kept writing. Then the bailiff appeared at their table. "Mr. Beckett, Mr. Farley, neutral, purely informational. The judge would like to see you both in chambers." Dwight stood slowly, the knees making their routine objection. Slade rose immediately. "Your Honor cannot conduct ex-parte communication with one party during an active proceeding. Mr. Farley is to be present throughout," the bailiff said. "Any material communication will be placed on the record as required." Slade sat back down. His expression did not change, but something in the set of his shoulders did. Rex watched Nolan stand up. Nolan did not look at him. He walked through the side door and down the short corridor with Dwight a half step behind, and the sounds of the courtroom fell away, and there was just the particular quiet of an institutional hallway at 9 in the morning. Fluorescent light overhead, dark carpet underfoot, framed portraits of judges who had made decisions in rooms like the one behind him, and then become photographs in hallways like this one. He walked. The chambers were what you'd expect from a man who had occupied the space for a long time, and hadn't tried to decorate it into something it wasn't. Dark wood shelving floor to ceiling. Legal volumes so old their spines had faded to the same gray-brown. All of them. A desk that had been in this room longer than any current employee of the courthouse. A window on the west wall looking out over downtown Pittsburgh, the morning light coming in pale and indirect, the city below doing its regular business without any awareness of the specific tension in this room. Gerald Hartley was standing at the window with his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn when they entered. "Sit down," he said. "Both of you." They sat. He was quiet, long enough that Dwight drew a breath and then decided against using it, which was the right instinct. Then Hartley turned around. Up close, without the bench between them, He looked different from the man who had presided over thousands of decisions, not softer, but more occupied, more like a person and less like a function. The lines around his eyes were the kind accumulated from decades of reading carefully and deciding carefully and living with the decisions after. 3 nights ago, he said, my daughters called me from a motel off Route 51. Their car had broken down in the rain. They had been standing on the shoulder of the highway for close to an hour. He paused. No one stopped. The room held the words, until you did. Nolan said, Your Honor, I had no idea. I know you didn't. Not sharp, not gentle, just certain. That's the entire point. He walked to the desk and sat down. The movement of a man who had been thinking about this since Friday night and had arrived at something he needed to say out loud and on the record. In some form, my daughters told me what happened. That you'd worked 2 jobs that day, that you were exhausted, that you stopped anyway, looked at their car, and when you couldn't fix it on the shoulder in that weather, you drove them somewhere safe, that you handed them a business card and drove back out into the rain without asking for anything. He looked at Nolan directly. You spoke to them like they were people. Not a problem to solve and move past. People anyone would have. No, the word landed without inflection, without drama. Just as a correction of a factual error. Most people didn't. That stretch of Route 51, at that hour, in that weather, you were the only drivers who stopped. So let's not make it smaller than it was. Dwight was very still beside him. The pen was not moving. Hartley opened a different folder on the desk. Not the case file from the courtroom. Something assembled separately. Printed pages with handwritten annotations in the margins. The handwriting of someone who reads with a pen and marks what matters. I reviewed your complete file Saturday evening, and again Sunday morning, he said. I pulled every item of evidence the plaintiff submitted. He turned a page. The photographs Colton Development logged as Exhibits 4, 6, and 7, submitted as documentation of physical lease violations. I cross-referenced the addresses visible in the image backgrounds against your garage location. He looked up. One of those photographs shows a fire escape configuration on the south-facing wall of the depicted building. Your property has no south-facing fire escape at any point during the lease term. This is confirmed in the building inspection records both parties submitted. He turned another page. A second photograph shows a blue rectangular sign in the upper left corner of the frame. No such sign appears in any inspection record, any street documentation, or any photograph taken at your address during the lease period. He set the page down. Those 2 photographs do not depict your property. Dwight sat up straighter, slowly. The way a man does when something he suspected solidifies into confirmation. The third photograph, Hartley continued, has a timestamp embedded in the image metadata. That timestamp predates the lease violation it was submitted to document by 14 months. It cannot serve as evidence of a violation that had not yet occurred. He closed the folder. I then reviewed the payment records. You made 3 monthly payments. Each has a transaction number, a transfer date, and a bank confirmation. The management company that processes rent for Colton's properties recorded 2 of those 3 payments as missing from their ledger. He paused. 1 recording error is possible. 2 consecutive recording errors for the same tenant, in the same payment window, affecting amounts large enough to generate a lawsuit. That is not an error. That is a pattern of a different kind. The word stayed in the room, Dwight said quietly. Your Honor, Hartley looked at him. I know. A silence. I also pulled records for the surrounding jurisdictions, Hartley said. 6 commercial tenants on properties under Colton Development's ownership or pending acquisition in the past 2 years. All served with lease termination suits, citing the same 3 categories of violation. Identical language across the filings. He looked at Nolan. 4 vacated before reaching trial. 1 declared bankruptcy. You are the 6th. Nolan looked at his hands on his knees. Then, back up, I considered recusing myself this morning, Hartley said. The connection between you and my family, however accidental, is real. It creates a perception issue that opposing counsel will raise the moment they become aware of it. And in my experience, opposing counsel in a case like this does not overlook useful information. He held Nolan's gaze. But I also know that if I recuse, this case is reassigned. The earliest available date for a hearing of this type is 6 to 8 weeks. He let that sit. Nolan said, I can't absorb 6 to 8 weeks. I know. I reviewed your financial documentation. Hartley leaned back slightly. So here is what I need from you, and I need you to understand it clearly. If I continue to preside over this case, I will run it exactly as I would run any other case before this bench. The fact that you helped my daughters does not earn you a favorable ruling. It does not earn you leniency. It does not earn you anything except what you are already entitled to, a fair proceeding. Can you accept that? Nolan didn't hesitate. Yes, he said, not because it was the right answer to give, because it was the true answer. The only one he had. Hartley looked at him for a moment longer, the look of a man deciding whether the person across from him means what they say. Then he stood. Then let's go back, he said. The courtroom reassembled, papers, chairs, the particular sound of a formal room re-inhabiting its formality after a brief suspension of it. Slade had new pages on top of his stack. Rex Colton had stopped looking serene, not anxious exactly, but watching. The posture of a man who knows the weather has changed and is trying to determine which direction it moved. Hartley entered, took the bench. Settled. We are back on the record, he said, Mr. Slade. You may continue. Slade rose, smooth as before. Maybe smoother. The recess had given him time to press everything flat. Thank you, Your Honor. The plaintiff will demonstrate through documentation and testimony that Beckett Auto has operated in consistent violation of the commercial lease agreement. We have photographic evidence of conditions generating noise and waste violations, accounting records reflecting payment delinquency, and testimony from the Colton property management team establishing the pattern of. Before you continue, Hartley said. Slade stopped. The court has questions regarding the photographic evidence submitted by the plaintiff. A pause. Half a second. Slade recalibrating. Of course, Your Honor. Hartley lifted the first photograph from the exhibit folder, held it at an angle the room could see. This image was submitted as documentation of conditions at the defendant's property. Can you confirm for the record the date it was taken, the identity of the photographer, and provide verification of the embedded metadata? Slade's answer came a fraction slower than his previous ones. The photographs were provided by Colton Development's property management team as part of their standard documentation process. That is not what I asked. The room shifted, not dramatically. A degree, too. The kind of shift that happens before weather changes, when the air does something you can feel before you can name. Can you confirm the date the photograph was taken, the identity of the photographer, and verify the metadata? We can supplement the record with that information at a later. At this moment, you cannot confirm any of those things? Slade's jaw moved once. Controlled. At this moment, Your Honor. We are not in a position to independently verify the metadata. So the answer is no. Hartley set the photograph down. Noted he lifted a second photograph. This image shows a blue rectangular sign visible in the upper left corner of the frame. The defendant's building records, submitted by both parties, contain no reference to such a sign at the garage address at any point during the lease term. Can you account for the sign's presence in this photograph? Slade looked at the photograph. Actually looked at it, for what appeared to be the first time. The look of a man encountering something he had trusted without examining, Your Honor. We would need additional time to investigate, Mr. Slade. Not raised, not sharp, simply final. You prepared this evidence. You selected these exhibits. The court is not going to generate additional preparation time for documentation you have had access to for months. He set the second photograph down. We will move forward. Dwight, beside Nolan, slid the yellow legal pad an inch in his direction. 3 words in Dwight's cramped handwriting. Stay on them. Nolan looked at the words. Looked back at the bench. Hartley picked up the third photograph, Exhibit 7. The timestamp in the image metadata indicates this photograph was taken 14 months before the date of the lease violation it was submitted to document. He looked at Slade. Can you explain how a photograph taken 14 months prior can serve as evidence of a violation that had not yet occurred? Slade said nothing for 2 full seconds. There may have been a cataloging error in the... A cataloging error, Hartley repeated. Not as a question. As a thing being placed carefully on a table for the room to examine. That resulted in a photograph predating the alleged violation by over a year being submitted to this court as evidence of that violation. Slade? We would ask the court to allow us to. The court does not accept Exhibits 4, 6, or 7 as verified documentation of conditions at the defendant's property. Hartley set the third photograph down with the other 2. The plaintiff's photographic evidence is insufficient as submitted. We will proceed to the payment records. Rex Colton shifted in his chair for the first time, Small movement. But Nolan caught it. Hartley moved through the payment records the way a man moves through a space he has already mapped. Not fast. Not performing deliberateness. Just moving with the particular steadiness of someone who has read the same set of facts multiple times and understands them from every angle they can be approached from. The plaintiff alleges 3 months of unpaid rent as grounds for lease violation, Hartley said. The defendant's bank records submitted into evidence by both parties show 3 outgoing transfers on the correct dates for each of those months. Each transfer has a transaction number. Each has a bank confirmation. He looked at the plaintiff's table. The property management company's ledger records 2 of those 3 transfers as absent. Slade, Your Honor. Accounting discrepancies in property management systems are not uncommon. We would characterize this as an administrative. I want to be precise about what is being characterized, Hartley said. The plaintiff is characterizing as an administrative error a discrepancy that resulted in a lawsuit. A lawsuit requiring this defendant to retain legal counsel, to appear before this court, and to defend himself against an allegation of non-payment for rent he demonstrably paid. He looked at Slade. Is that the characterization you want on the record? Slade said nothing. Then let's move to it directly. Hartley looked across the aisle. Not at Slade this time. At Rex, Mr. Colton. You are the principal of the company that filed this action. Would you like to address the payment discrepancy? Rex stood. He had the bearing of someone who had answered difficult questions in difficult rooms for 2 decades and come out intact every time. He adjusted his jacket. Looked at the bench with the expression of a man about to explain something regrettable but necessary, Your Honor. With respect. The property in question sits within a development corridor that Colton Development has been working to reposition for 18 months. The commercial composition of that block needs to change for the investment to generate the returns our stakeholders require. An auto repair facility, regardless of the operator's personal qualities, is not compatible with the direction that block is moving. We have attempted to reach a negotiated resolution with Mr. Beckett on multiple occasions. He declined each time. This litigation was a last resort, smooth, considered. The version of truth that contains just enough of the real thing to sound honest. Then he added, the honest truth is that his shop doesn't belong in what that block is becoming. And there it was, said as candor, offered as though honesty were a virtue he was demonstrating. The room went quiet in a way it had not been quiet before. Not the quiet of people waiting for something to happen. The quiet of people registering that something already had. Hartley looked at Rex Colton for a long moment, the look of a man who has just been handed the answer to a question he had been working toward for an hour. Thank you, Mr. Colton, he said. The court has noted your statement. Rex sat down, adjusted his jacket again, still composed. Still operating on the assumption that the room was going where rooms like this one had always gone for him. Dwight's pen was moving fast now, short strokes. Things becoming relevant that had not been relevant before. And then Slade stood up. He put a new folder on the record table, new photographs, clear, full color, time-stamped in the corner. Nolan recognized the location in the first image before he understood what he was looking at. Wrote 51, the shoulder. Friday night. His Honda pulled in behind the Audi, the hazard light still visible in the frame. And him, getting out of the driver's side, rain visible in the headlights, the timestamp read 11:04 p.m. Your Honor. Slade's voice had recovered its full smoothness, better than before, pressed flat and dry and confident. The plaintiff became aware on Friday evening of a connection between the defendant and members of Your Honor's immediate family. We have photographic document showing the defendant in direct contact with Your Honor's daughters on the night preceding this hearing. He placed the photographs on the record table. We respectfully submit that this relationship raises material questions regarding the impartiality of these proceedings, and we formally request that Your Honor recuse from this matter immediately. The room was completely still. Nolan felt Dwight's hand move toward the legal pad and stop. He felt the entire room's attention reorient, the way a crowd shifts when something unexpected happens on a stage. Rex Colton leaned back with a fraction of something crossing his face. Not quite satisfaction, but close. The expression of a man watching a move arrive that he had planned several turns earlier. Hartley looked at the photographs on the record table. His face gave nothing. He looked at them for 3 seconds. Then he said, Mr. Beckett, his name, flat and formal. Dwight leaned immediately toward him. Don't. But Nolan was already standing. Not because he had planned it. Not because he had thought it through and arrived at a strategy. His body had made the decision before his brain caught up, and his brain, when it arrived a half-second later, agreed completely and without reservation. He was standing, and he was going to speak, Your Honor, he said. I'd like to address this directly. On the record, Slade. Your Honor, this is procedurally. Hartley raised one hand, barely. The smallest possible gesture that still managed to stop a room. Slade stopped. Hartley looked at Nolan, the direct look. Not warm, not cold, present, fully present. Go ahead, Mr. Beckett. Nolan breathed once, not for drama, because Dwight had told him to breathe, and Dwight was right about most things. Friday night, he said. I finished my second shift at the diner at 10:40. I was driving south on Route 51 heading home. I saw a car on the shoulder with the hazard lights on. 2 women standing next to it in the rain. He kept his voice level. Just the facts in the right order. I pulled over. I looked at the car and couldn't fix it on the shoulder without proper equipment, so I offered them a ride to the nearest motel. In the car they told me their names. Claire and Jess. They mentioned their father worked in law. I didn't ask what kind. It didn't seem relevant to getting them out of the rain. He paused. I did not know who their father was. I did not know who they were beyond their first names. I gave them a business card for the garage and drove home. I had no further contact with either of them between Friday night and this morning. He looked at the exhibit photographs on the record table. I am telling this court all of this now, without being asked, without consulting my attorney, because if there is a question about whether something was arranged or calculated, I would rather answer it clearly in the open than let it sit underneath this proceeding and become a reason to throw out what is true. He looked at Hartley. If my being honest about Friday night creates a legal problem for this case, I will accept that. But I am not going to stand here and pretend I did something I didn't do, or that I didn't do something I did. He sat down. Dwight did not write anything on the legal pad. He sat perfectly still with the pen between 2 fingers and his eyes on the bench. Slade rose. The voice smoothed back into its register. Your Honor, regardless of the defendant's account, the appearance of partiality created by this connection, Mr. Slade. Hartley's voice had not changed by 1 degree. This court has just received a sworn voluntary statement from the defendant, made without prompting and without direction from his counsel, fully disclosing the nature and circumstances of his contact with my daughters. That statement is now part of the record. He looked at the room. The contact was incidental. It was accidental. It occurred before this defendant had any knowledge of who would preside over his case. The defendant has been fully transparent. The question of recusal will be decided by this court, Slade, Your Honor. The plaintiff maintains. I am not finished. Hartley looked down at the papers in front of him. A long moment. The room held its breath. I have reviewed my ethical obligations with respect to this matter. The contact between the defendant and my family was not sought, not arranged, and not leveraged by either party. It has been disclosed in full on the record by the defendant himself. The defendant made no attempt to contact me, made no attempt to use this coincidence to his advantage in any communication before or during these proceedings. He looked at Slade. The motion to recuse is denied. Rex Colton's posture changed. The first real visible shift of the morning. Something leaving his shoulders that had been there since he walked in. Slade sat down slowly. Recalculating, Nolan sat very still and thought, okay, still here, still in it. Dwight turned to him, just slightly. The pen was moving again. His face had the look of a man who had spent months on a case being cautiously honest about the odds, and who was now, for the first time, allowing himself to believe something different was possible. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Hartley opened the folder he had carried from Chambers to the bench, the one with the handwritten margin notes. He set it in front of him. The court will now address the pattern of litigation identified in the record, he said. Rex Colton looked up. 6 commercial tenants in Allegheny County and surrounding jurisdictions over the past 24 months. Properties under Colton Development's ownership or pending acquisition. Lease termination suits in each case. Identical categories of alleged violation across all 6 filings. He looked at the plaintiff's table. 4 tenants vacated before reaching trial. 1 declared bankruptcy. The defendant before this court is the 6th. He paused. Mr. Colton has stated on the record that the true basis for this litigation is not lease compliance but commercial incompatibility. The plaintiff's photographic evidence has been found insufficient. The payment discrepancy has not been satisfactorily explained, and the pattern of substantially similar actions against multiple small tenants over a compressed period raises questions. This court is not prepared to leave unaddressed. Slade was on his feet. Your Honor, the prior cases are not. They become relevant, Hartley said, when they suggest a systematic use of civil litigation to pressure tenants into vacating before their leases expire, using claims that cannot be substantiated when examined. That is relevant. He looked at Slade steadily. Sit down. Slade sat. The room was silent in a way it had not been at any point in the morning. The silence of people who have watched something they expected to go one direction go another, and are still catching up to what they saw. Nolan looked at his hands on the table. Flat. Still. The same hands that had touched that engine on Route 51 in the rain 3 nights ago. Not because there was anything to gain from it. Just because he was there and they needed help, and he had the knowledge to give. The same hands he'd shown the court this morning when he stood up without being asked. He breathed outside the high windows of Allegheny County Courthouse. The October morning had shifted. The gray had given way to something pale and almost gold, the kind of light that showed up without warning on cold mornings and lasted exactly as long as it lasted and didn't promise anything beyond itself. But it was there. Right now, in this room on this morning, it was there. Hartley set his pen down, just that, the small sound of it against the bench. But something in the room responded to the sound the way rooms respond when the person holding the most authority in them stops preparing and starts deciding. Papers stopped moving. Chairs stopped adjusting. Even the fluorescent hum above the defense table seemed to recede. Nolan felt it. Dwight felt it. His pen stopped. Slade felt it. He went still in a way he hadn't been still all morning. Hartley looked at the papers in front of him for a long moment, not reading, just looking. The way you look at something when you already know what it says and you are deciding, finally, what to do with that knowledge in a room full of people who are waiting. Then he looked up. The court has reviewed the totality of the plaintiff's submitted evidence, he said, and the court has heard testimony and statement from both parties this morning. He looked at Slade. 3 photographs submitted as primary visual documentation of the alleged physical violations have been found to depict locations other than the defendant's property, to predate the alleged violations, or both. The plaintiff has been unable to verify the date, the photographer, or the metadata of any of the 3 images. They are not accepted as verified evidence of conditions at the defendant's premises. Slade opened his mouth. Hartley continued without pause. The plaintiff alleges 3 months of delinquent rent. The defendant's bank records show 3 transfers made on the correct dates, each with a transaction number and bank confirmation. The management company's ledger records 2 of those transfers as absent. The plaintiff has characterized this as an administrative error. The court notes that an administrative error of this nature, one that generated a lawsuit seeking lease termination and monetary damages against a tenant who demonstrably paid, is not a characterization this court is prepared to accept without independent verification. No such verification has been provided. Rex Colton's hands were no longer folded on the table, they were flat against it, pressing. The hands of a man maintaining composure through deliberate physical effort. Additionally, Hartley said, the plaintiff's principal has stated on the record that the actual basis for this litigation is not lease compliance, but the commercial incompatibility of the defendant's business with the plaintiff's development plans for the property. He let that sentence stand alone for a moment, just that sentence in the air, in a room built for precision. That is not a lease violation, that is a preference. And a preference does not constitute grounds for early lease termination, under the terms of a signed commercial agreement. He opened the folder with the handwritten margin notes. The court has also reviewed the pattern of litigations associated with Colton development over the past 24 months. 6 commercial tenants, 6 sets of substantially identical claims. 4 vacated without reaching trial. 1 declared bankruptcy. He looked at Rex directly, not at Slade, at Rex. You have been in this room before, Mr. Colton. Different defendants, different addresses. The same 3 categories of violation in the same language in every filing. He closed the folder. This court does not adjudicate the prior cases today. But this court does not pretend not to see what the record shows. Slade rose. One last attempt, Your Honor. The plaintiff reserves the right to. The plaintiff's request for early lease termination is denied. 6 words. Slade stopped mid-breath. The allegations of breach of contract are not supported by sufficient verified evidence. Each of the 3 categories of alleged violation, noise, waste disposal, and payment delinquency, is individually unsupported by the evidence as submitted. Taken together, the plaintiff's case does not meet the evidentiary standard required to override a valid commercial lease agreement. Nolan did not move. He was not sure he could. Something had happened in his legs under the table. Not weakness, more like all the tension he'd been storing in them for 6 months had decided to leave at once without giving him any warning. He sat very still and let it go. The plaintiff shall reimburse the defendant for all reasonable legal costs incurred in the defense of this action, Hartley continued. That figure to be submitted by Mr. Farley within 10 business days, at which point the court will review and approve. Slade was standing again. The last move of a man who won't sit down until the gavel falls, Your Honor. The plaintiff intends to appeal. Furthermore, Hartley said it without raising his voice. Just said it over Slade. The way you say something when you have the authority to say it and the other person speaking doesn't change that. This matter is referred to the District Attorney's Office of Allegheny County for review. The referral will include the submission of photographic evidence later found to depict locations other than the defendant's property, the discrepancies in the payment ledger, and the pattern of substantially similar actions filed against multiple small commercial tenants over a 24-month period. He looked at Slade, then at Rex, then back at the papers. The court has an obligation to flag potential abuse of civil process when the record suggests systematic pressure applied to tenants who lack the resources to resist it. The district attorney's office will determine what, if anything, follows from that review. Rex Colton looked at Slade. Slade looked at the table. Is there anything further from either party before the court closes? Silence, Dwight said. Nothing further from the defendant, Your Honor. Hartley picked up the gavel. Case dismissed. The sound of it filled the room, clean and final. The sound of something ending that had needed to end for a long time. Rex stood immediately, jacket buttoned, already on his phone. The bearing of a man absorbing a loss and beginning the process of reshaping the narrative around it before he reached the parking lot. Slade was beside him, talking fast and low. They moved toward the door without looking at the defense table. Nolan let them go. He sat at the defendant's table and breathed, pen down. He turned to Nolan, and for the first time since they'd met in that small office above the dry cleaner on Forbes Avenue, Dwight Farley smiled. Not the professional variant he used in meetings and on phone calls. The real one. The kind that takes over a face before the person wearing it can manage it into something more appropriate. You won, he said. Nolan looked at him. Just looked at him for a moment.
I wanna...
Not only that, Dwight's voice dropped. Still courthouse appropriate, but the smile was not going anywhere. They are going to be investigated, which means the other 5 tenants may have grounds to pursue their own actions. Which means this does not end here for Colton. He picked up the legal pad. This morning opened a door, Nolan. Not just for you. Nolan looked at the bench. Hartley had already gone through the side door. No look back, no signal, no moment staged for anyone's benefit. Just gone. The way a judge exits a proceeding, professional and complete, back into the corridor and away. Nolan had wanted to say something. He didn't know exactly what. Thank you felt too small, too personal for a courthouse floor. And probably wrong in some procedural sense he didn't fully understand. But he wanted to say something. Maybe that was the wrong instinct. Maybe Hartley had done what he'd done for the same reason Nolan had stopped on Route 51. Not because it earned anything. Not because it required acknowledgement. Just because it was what the evidence demanded and what the moment required. And those 2 things had finally pointed in the same direction. He stood up, his legs held. That was something. Outside, the courthouse steps were wide and pale and caught the October sun at an angle that made you squint after the fluorescent interior. Nolan stood at the top of them and breathed air that did not smell like paper and old wood and the specific weight of a room full of people waiting for a decision. It smelled like Pittsburgh in October. Cold, clean, faintly metallic. The smell of a city that had its own business to attend to and was attending to it. Dwight came out behind him, briefcase in hand. The smile still not entirely gone from his face, though it had settled into something quieter now. More internal. Coffee, Dwight said. Yeah, strong coffee. The kind that knows what just happened. 2 blocks down. The place on Grant, I know the place. I've been coming to this courthouse since before you were born. He put a hand briefly on Nolan's shoulder. The kind of contact that communicates everything it needs to, and doesn't linger past that. 10 minutes. Come when you're ready. He started down the steps. Nolan stayed at the top. He needed a minute. One specific minute of standing in the October sun with the facts of the morning settling into something he could hold without dropping. He still had the garage. Beckett Auto. With the slight crooked sign he kept meaning to straighten. The second-hand lift he was still paying off. The floor he swept every Friday because a clean floor mattered to him even when no one was watching, and there was no strategic reason for it to matter. Still his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. Unknown number. Pittsburgh area code. He answered Nolan, Claire's voice, brighter than he remembered from the car. Or maybe just different without rain in the background and fear underneath it. My dad texted. Said it was over. A pause with movement in it, like she was already doing 3 things at once. Are you okay? How did it? I still have the garage. A beat of silence. Then a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something louder and less contained. Uninhibited and genuine, the sound of someone who had been holding on to a specific hope and just heard it confirmed. From further away, Jess's voice. Tell him I told you so, Claire. Jess says she told me. What did she tell you? That good things happen to people who deserve them. She was very calm about it, very certain. Extremely annoying, she was right, she usually is. Don't tell her I said that. More movement. Shoes on pavement, an outdoor echo. We're in the parking lot. We've been here since 9. Nolan looked down the courthouse steps toward the lot, and there they were. 2 figures near the far row, one of them waving with her whole arm, phone still at her ear. Claire. Jess stood beside her with her arms crossed and her feet planted, not waving, just watching, in the way she watched things, fully present, no performance in it. Something loosened in Nolan's chest, not dramatically, not like a scene in something, just quietly, the way tension releases when the reason to hold it is finally gone. Like a knot that had been pulled tight for months and suddenly had nothing left to pull against. He lifted his hand back. He was halfway down the steps when the side door of the courthouse opened. Not the main entrance. The narrow access door on the north face of the building that let out onto the service road running along the east wall. He glanced at it the way you glance at peripheral movement out of habit. Gerald Hartley came through it, no robe, just the man. Dark gray suit, collar open at the top, jacket slightly loose the way a jacket gets when you've been wearing it since early morning, and the formality of the day has wound down. He looked, without the bench between them, like a person who had finished something difficult and was deciding what to do with his hands now that it was over. He saw Nolan on the steps. He walked toward him. No ceremony, no staging. Just 2 men on a public sidewalk outside a courthouse on a Tuesday morning, one of them moving toward the other because there was something left to say. Hartley extended his hand. Nolan shook it. You did the right thing in there, Hartley said, both times. Nolan thought about Route 51, the rain, the hazard lights going weak in the downpour, the specific moment when his foot had moved toward the brake instead of the gas, and he hadn't entirely known why. Standing up without clearing it with Dwight first was probably not the smart move, he said. It was the right one, firm. Not debating, correcting. Smart and right coincide less often than people want to believe. When they do, you remember it. When only one of them shows up, the right one is worth more. He held Nolan's gaze. You could have stayed in your seat. Let your lawyer handle it. Let Slade's accusation sit in the room and become complicated. That's what most people would have done. I couldn't, I know. A pause. That's the same thing that happened on Route 51. You couldn't drive past. He looked at him. Some people are built that way. It's not heroism. It's not strategy. It's just what they are. Nolan looked at the courthouse behind them. Then back. You took a risk this morning. Staying on the case after Slade raised it, I reviewed my obligations. The contact was accidental, disclosed completely, and there was no evidence of any attempt to leverage it. Recusing would have protected me from criticism. It would not have been the right call for the case. He paused. I've been a judge for 22 years. I know the difference between protecting myself and doing my job. Usually they're the same thing. When they're not, the job takes priority. The DA referral, Nolan said. The other 5 tenants? Hartley nodded. I cannot tell you what the DA will do with it. That is not mine to control once it leaves this court. But the record is there. The pattern is documented. What people choose to do with a clear record is their business. He looked at Nolan. Your lawyer has been in contact with 2 of the prior tenants already. Dwight found them during case prep. He said 2 of them kept records. Then they may have something to work with. He looked toward the parking lot where Claire and Jess were still visible. Claire now on a different call, Jess still just standing and watching. My daughters think a great deal of you. Nolan felt his face do something he didn't entirely plan. They were easy to help. They didn't make it complicated. They can make most things complicated, Hartley said, and there was something in it that wasn't quite humor, but was aware of itself. The voice of a man who knew his daughters well enough to know exactly what he was describing. They didn't with you. That means something. How are they? Nolan asked, because it was the right question. And because it was the true one. Hartley was quiet for a moment. Better than last week, he said, which has more to do with me than I'd like to admit. He looked at the courthouse, at the stone of it, the weight of it, then back. I've been a fair judge. I know that about myself, and I've taken a certain amount of quiet satisfaction in it. But Friday night, when they called from that motel, when they told me that a stranger who had already worked 14 hours still stopped for them, and that their own father had left their birthday dinner to take a phone call, he stopped. I didn't sleep Friday night. Not from guilt exactly. From understanding something I hadn't understood clearly before. Nolan waited. Being fair in a courtroom and being present at home are not the same skill, Hartley said. I had confused the two for a long time. I thought doing the job well was the same as being there. It isn't. It is not remotely the same. Nolan thought about what Claire had said in the car, the tone she'd used. Not angry, not even properly sad. Just settled. The way people sound when they've made peace with a recurring disappointment and stopped expecting it to resolve differently. He always means to be there. You can still start, Nolan said. Hartley looked at him. My daughters said something similar. Less diplomatically. That sounds like Jess. Exactly like Jess. Something crossed his face. Brief and real. Word for word, actually. He extended his hand again. A different handshake this time. The first one had been acknowledgement. This one was something closer to respect, offered between equals who had arrived at it from very different directions. Send me the bill for the Audi when it's ready. Full rate. Don't adjust it. Claire already warned me I'd charge too little. She'll be right, I charge what it costs. Then I'll argue with you about it when I see the invoice. He held Nolan's hand one moment longer than the handshake required. Go find your lawyer. He's earned his coffee. He turned and walked back through the side door. The door closed behind him. Nolan stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Just stood there. With the October air doing its cold, clean thing around him, and the city carrying on its regular business past the edge of the courthouse property, and his phone buzzing again in his pocket, which was almost certainly Claire, which meant he should probably move. He moved. Dwight was on his second coffee when Nolan got to the place on Grant Street small shop. The kind that had been there 20 years through every shift the neighborhood had taken and would be there 20 more. 4 tables. A counter with stools that had developed their own particular lean from decades of use. Coffee that tasted like it had considered the question of flavor seriously and arrived at a strong opinion. Dwight pushed a full cup across the table without looking up from his legal pad, where he was still writing. He wrote things down after cases the same way he wrote things down during them. 30 years of habit didn't stop because a gavel fell. Hartley, Dwight said. Not a question. We talked, I saw. He looked up, glasses on. He's a good man. Yeah. He took a risk this morning that he didn't have to take. The ethical ground for recusal was there. He could have stepped away clean and nobody would have faulted him. He tapped the pen against the pad. He read the file first, then he decided. That order matters. Nolan drank the coffee. It did have opinions. Strong ones that landed at the back of the throat. The DA referral, Nolan said. What actually happens now? Now someone with a subpoena and a budget starts looking at Colton's pattern, which is what I have been wanting to happen since the 3rd week of this case when I found the 2nd prior filing. Dwight set the pen down. The tailor, man named Prescott, had a shop on Braddock. He kept everything, lease, payment records, the certified letters Colton's management company sent him. Same language as yours, different address. The woman from the appliance repair shop on Penn Avenue kept records too. She thought she might need them someday. He looked at Nolan over the rims of his glasses. Someday is now. Will they get anything back? I don't know. Depends what the DA finds, depends what they can prove about intent versus negligence, depends on a lot of things I can't predict. He picked up his coffee. What I know is they'll be heard. They'll have a record. They'll have documentation that someone with authority looked at it and saw what they saw. He set the cup down. Before this morning, they had nothing except their word against the company with lawyers. Nolan looked at the table, at the grain of the wood, worn smooth in the middle from years of cups and elbows. He thought about the printer, the one from the bankruptcy filing. Case number only, no name. No way to reach him through Dwight's research. He hoped someone reached him. What do I do now? He said. Dwight looked at him like the question was the funniest thing he'd heard all week, which given the week was saying something. You go back to work. You open the garage tomorrow morning. You fix cars. He picked up the pen again. That's what you do. Nolan finished the coffee. That was exactly what he did. He drove home through Pittsburgh at noon. Same streets he always took. Same bridges over the same gray-brown river catching the October light in the flat, honest way it had. But different in the way things are different when the thing you've been afraid of for 6 months is no longer the thing in front of you. When the road ahead is just the road and not the road plus a dread that has been riding in the passenger seat so long you stopped noticing the weight of it. He parked behind the garage, got out, stood in the back lot and looked at the building. Brick. Old. Scuffed around the loading edge from years of being a working space. The door with the handle that stuck when the weather was damp, which in Pittsburgh was most of the time. He went in through the back. The garage smelled the same way it had smelled every morning he'd opened it for 6 years. Oil, metal. The warmth of a space that had been worked in long enough to hold it. The lift, slightly tilted, left the way second-hand lifts go when they've been used hard enough. The tool wall, organized in a system that existed only in his head but existed completely in his head. The invoice book on the shelf above the parts cabinet, half full of handwriting that was sometimes rushed but always accurate. He changed into work clothes. He got to work because there were 3 cars booked for the week and the first one was already in the bay, because the garage was still the garage and the work was still the work and the world did not pause to celebrate small victories in county courtrooms. It just kept going. Which was, when he thought about it, exactly right. The keeping going was the point. The keeping going was what he had been fighting for. He worked until 6. Then he locked up. Stood in the back lot for a moment in the cooling evening air, looked at the sign above the door, Beckett Auto. Black letters on white. Slightly crooked on the left side, the way it had been since the wind knocked it 2 winters ago. He'd been meaning to straighten it since then. Never got to it. He looked at it for a moment, left it. Claire called Thursday morning at 9:10. He was under a 2019 Subaru at the time, which meant he answered on speaker with grease on both hands, and the particular half attention of a man doing 2 things, neither of which he was willing to stop doing. The Audi, Claire said, in the tone of someone who had been thinking about the Audi since Tuesday. What about it? When can you look at it? Bring it in Friday morning. I'll know more by end of day. How much is it going to be? I won't know until I look at it. Ballpark, Claire, I'm just asking for a ballpark. I'll know Friday. A pause. Then from further away, Jess's voice. She's going to negotiate with you when she gets the bill, Claire. I am not going to negotiate. I'm going to point out that he's undercharging and suggest a more appropriate number. That's negotiating. That's correcting. Nolan extracted himself from under the Subaru. Sat up. Friday morning, 8 o'clock. I'll call you when I know what it needs. We'll be there at 8:15, Claire said. I said 8. We'll be there at 8:15. He looked at the phone, then put it back in his pocket. They arrived at 8:12, which he suspected was Claire's version of compromise. He had the Audi up on the lift by the time they came through the bay door. Jess came in first. Claire was still on her phone in the lot, finishing something, one finger raised in the universal gesture of one more minute. Jess walked into the garage and did what she'd said she would do. She looked at it. Not the casual look of someone visiting a space they're curious about. The full look, The one she gave to things she was genuinely trying to understand. She looked at the tool wall, the lift with the slight leftward tilt, the invoice book on the shelf, the floor, the sign above the interior door that matched the one outside, Beckett Auto in the same black letters. "You keep meaning to fix that," she said. He looked up from where he was under the hood. "What?" "The sign, the crooked one. You keep meaning to fix it." He lowered his hands from the engine. "How do you?" "The rest of the garage is organized. Very organized, actually, intentionally. So either you don't notice it, which doesn't fit, or you keep thinking you'll get to it." She looked at the sign, then at him. "Which is it?" "I keep meaning to get to it." She looked at the sign for another moment. "Leave it," she said. "What?" "Leave it crooked. It's better." He didn't have an answer for that, so he went back to the engine. She walked slowly along the tool wall, not touching anything, just looking. The way she looked at things, attending to them fully without needing to interfere with them. "It's exactly what I thought it would be," she said after a while. "What did you think it would be?" "A place that someone actually cares about." She turned to look at him. The direct look, the one without anything extra in it. Just clear, you can tell. The organization, the cleanliness, the way the tools are worn in specific places from specific uses. The lift is second-hand and slightly off, and you've learned to work with it instead of around it. She paused. Most people work around the things they can't fix. He wasn't entirely sure she was talking about the lift. He was fairly sure she wasn't only talking about the lift. Claire came in from the lot, phone finally pocketed. "What did I miss?" "Jess is philosophizing about the lift. She does that." Claire came to stand beside the car. "What does it need?" "Fuse housing replacement, which you knew. New seals on the battery terminals, and the front left brake pad is closer to gone than it should be for this car's mileage, which means whoever serviced it last missed it or ignored it." "How much?" he told her. A pause. "Nolan, that's the rate. That is not the rate. That is you doing that thing where you charge less than." "It's what it costs, Claire. It costs more than that. The parts alone are priced into what I told you. That's the number." She looked at him. He looked back. She was the kind of person who won most arguments through persistence and volume, and she clearly knew it, because she also knew when she was looking at someone who was not going to move. She looked at Jess. Jess shrugged. "He charges what it costs. He told Dad the same thing. Dad's going to fight him on the invoice. I know. He's going to leave a 5-star review." 3 paragraphs, he mentioned. Claire looked at Nolan. "He told you he was going to leave a review?" "He mentioned it. He's a sitting judge. He can't leave a Yelp review for someone involved in a case he presided over. The case is closed. It closed 4 days ago." Nolan went back to the engine. "The car'll be ready Saturday by noon." Claire made a sound that meant she wasn't done with the price conversation, but had accepted that it was over. She leaned against the wall beside her sister, both of them watching him work. The garage was warm. The lift held the Audi steady despite its leftward tilt. Outside, the October morning was doing its cold, clear thing. After a while, Jess said, "Dad's been home for dinner 3 nights this week." Nolan kept his hands in the engine. "Yeah, Tuesday, Wednesday, and last night." Phone in his jacket pocket during the meal. Not on the table. A pause. He asked us questions, not about school or plans, just questions. What we'd been thinking about. What we'd noticed lately. That's different. Very. She looked at the tool wall. He's trying to learn something he should have learned a long time ago, which is harder than learning it young. But he's trying. Nolan thought about the man standing by the window in Chambers on Monday morning, hands clasped behind his back. The weight of something in his shoulders that wasn't the robe. Being fair in a courtroom and being present at home are not the same skill. Said like a man who had discovered this the hard way, through an evidence review and a phone call from a motel and a stranger who stopped in the rain for reasons that had nothing to do with him. "Good," Nolan said. "Sybil." "Just that." Jess looked at him. The small nod of someone receiving an answer that is exactly the right size. Claire pushed off the wall. "We're getting breakfast. There's a place 2 blocks over that Jess likes. Come when you're done here." I've got 3 cars today. After the 3 cars, that'll be after 5. We'll be there until 6, she said it, like it was already a plan that had been made, and he had simply not been informed of it yet. Jess wants the window seat so she can read. I want the corner booth. We'll negotiate. You'll take the corner booth, Jess said. I'll read in the car. You'll read in the diner. I don't read in diners. You read everywhere. Nolan lowered his hands from the engine and looked at both of them. I'll come by after 5, he said. Claire pointed at him. 5:35, she considered. Fine, they left, their voices overlapping in the lot as they went. The specific sound of 2 people who have been finishing each other's sentences long enough that they've stopped noticing they do it. The garage was quiet again. Nolan stood at the engine for a moment before going back to work. The sign above the interior door was still crooked. He looked at it, left it. 3 weeks later, Dwight called on a Thursday morning. The DA's office has opened a formal inquiry, he said. Colton's financial records, the management company's payment ledgers, the prior tenants, all of it. A pause. Prescott filed his claim Monday. The woman from the appliance shop filed Wednesday. There are 2 others the DA's investigator turned up that we hadn't found. The printer, Nolan said, not yet. But they're looking. Dwight paused. Your case, the referral, the record Hartley put together, that's what opened the door. Without that on the record, Colton's pattern stays invisible. Nobody looks. The prior tenants stay isolated cases. Another pause. You staying in that room long enough for someone to look carefully mattered. Not just for you. Nolan was in the garage when the call came, standing at the parts cabinet. He stayed there after the call ended, hand resting on the edge of the cabinet door, looking at nothing in particular. He thought about the 4 tenants who left before trial. He thought about the tailor named Prescott who kept everything in a file, thinking he might need it someday, not knowing when someday would arrive. He thought about not being the kind of man who drove past. He put the phone in his pocket and went back to work. That same week he hired Troy, 21 years old, no certification yet. Had applied to 4 other shops in the area and been turned away from all of them on the same grounds. No experience, no references, no formal training beyond what he'd taught himself in his uncle's driveway on borrowed tools. He came in on a Tuesday and asked Nolan directly, no cover letter, just showed up at the bay door and asked if there was any kind of trial work available. Any work at all. Nolan had him look at the Subaru that was in the bay. Just look at it. Tell me what you hear. Troy stood beside the car with the engine idling. Listened for about 4 minutes without touching anything. Then he said, quietly and without drama, ground strap. Nolan looked at him. The ground strap's corroded at the connection point. It's causing intermittent voltage drop. That's the idle fluctuation. Nolan had been thinking ground strap for 2 days but hadn't confirmed it yet. He offered Troy a trial month that afternoon. The trial month became permanent in the 3rd week. He gave him a raise on a Thursday, which Troy received with the expression of someone who hadn't expected it and didn't know how to process it gracefully. He stood in the middle of the garage looking at the number Nolan had written on a post-it note. You've only had me 3 weeks, he said. You found the ground strap. I just listened. That's the job, Nolan said. That's the whole job. Troy looked at the post-it. Then he nodded. Once, the nod of someone filing something away in a place they'll keep. He went back to work. Nolan went back to work. The garage in October became the garage in November. The lift held. The tool wall stayed organized in its particular system. The sign above the door stayed crooked on the left side, and Nolan stopped thinking about straightening it, because Jess had said leave it and she was right, and that was a complete sentence. Rex Colton stopped driving past. Nolan noticed the absence on a Wednesday morning, standing in the lot with his coffee before opening. He realized he'd been tensing slightly every time a dark car slowed on the street, a reflex he'd developed without noticing it. And at some point in the past week, that reflex had stopped firing because the thing that caused it had stopped arriving. He stood in the lot with his coffee and noticed the absence of attention he hadn't consciously known he was carrying. That was what relief looked like, sometimes. Not a moment, not a resolution, just a gradual lightening. The weight leaving so slowly you only know it's gone when you reach for it and find nothing there. On a Sunday in November, Gerald Hartley burned pasta. This was not a surprise to anyone in the house, including Hartley himself, who had announced at the start of the cooking process that the outcome was uncertain and that everyone should manage their expectations accordingly. Claire had stationed herself near the stove as a precautionary measure. Jess had set the table and then returned to her book on the couch, which was either confidence in her father's eventual success or a studied refusal to watch the process. Nolan was there because Jess had texted him 4 days earlier. Sunday dinner. Dad's cooking. Come as a witness, he texted back. Witness to what? To whether he burns it. He'd arrived at 6. The pasta had gone into the water at 6:15. By 6:40 it was done, and done meant slightly past al dente in the direction of soft, which Hartley acknowledged without defensiveness when he plated it. It's edible, Claire said, tasting it. That was the goal, Hartley said. Low bar, I set it deliberately. They ate at the kitchen table. Not the dining room, which Nolan had noticed on his first visit was perfectly arranged and almost never used. The kitchen table, with the slightly uneven leg that Nolan had shimmed on a previous visit using a folded piece of cardboard from the recycling bin. A fix that was impermanent but functional, which was usually good enough for things that weren't broken so much as slightly off. During dinner, Hartley asked Claire about a paper she'd mentioned the week before. He asked Jess about a book she was in the middle of. He asked Nolan about Troy, having heard about the hire in a previous conversation, and listened to the full answer, including the part about the ground strap diagnosis, which he received with the attentiveness of a man who didn't understand the technical content, but understood what it meant about the person being described. He did not check his phone. Not once during the meal. After dinner, Claire cleared the plates and Jess made coffee without being asked. And Hartley sat at the table and watched his daughters move around the kitchen, with the expression of a man learning to pay attention to something he had been too busy to see clearly for a long time. Nolan noticed a cabinet door hanging slightly off its lower hinge on the far side of the kitchen. He found a screwdriver in the drawer where he'd found one before, fixed it while Claire was running water, turned around to find all three of them looking at him. You came for dinner, Jess said. The hinge was bothering me. You've been here 40 minutes. It was bothering me the whole 40 minutes. Claire looked at her father. I told you, keep him. Hartley looked at Nolan, with an expression that was somewhere between amusement and something more serious underneath it. My daughter has decided you're a permanent fixture. I just things. Yes, Hartley said. You do? After dinner? After the coffee? After a conversation about nothing in particular that lasted longer than anyone tracked, Nolan put on his jacket to leave. Claire was already on her phone, half engaged with something else, waving goodbye without looking up. Jess walked with him to the door. She stood in the doorway while he went down the front path toward the street. He's different this week than last week, she said. He stopped, turned back. How? She thought about it. The way she thought about things, actually thought, didn't just reach for the first answer. He's slower, she said, in a good way. Like he's decided that the thing happening right now is worth being in. Not just attended, actually in. She looked at him. I don't know if it lasts. People change and then they don't always keep it. But right now he's trying in a way that's real and not performed, and that's worth something. Nolan looked at her for a moment. Yeah, he said. It is. She nodded. That small certain nod of hers. Same time next Sunday, she said. He's attempting roast chicken. We've all agreed to pretend to be optimistic. He looked at her. I'll be there, he said. He walked to his car. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles over a residential neighborhood on a Sunday evening when the day is winding down and there's nothing left to do but let it. He got into the Honda. Sat for a moment before starting it. He thought about a Friday night 3 months ago. The rain, the hazard lights going weak in the dark, the moment on Route 51 when his foot moved toward the brake instead of the gas, and he hadn't been able to fully explain why, not even to himself. He hadn't stopped because he expected anything from it. He'd stopped because he couldn't be the kind of man who didn't. That was the whole of it, the rest. The garage, the ruling, the referral, the Sunday dinners with slightly overcooked pasta. None of that was the reward for stopping. That wasn't how any of this worked. It wasn't a transaction. It wasn't a story where goodness purchases a specific outcome. It was simpler than that. When you do the right thing, it becomes part of you. Not as memory, as character, as the shape of how you move through the world. And when the moment comes, the courtroom, the hard question, the choice between comfortable silence and costly honesty, you don't have to reach for who you want to be. You already are them. You've been them all along. He started the car, drove home through Pittsburgh on a Sunday night, the river catching the last of the light on his left, the city doing its quiet, ordinary things on his right, and the garage on the south side still standing, still his, the sign above the door still slightly crooked on the left side, the way he was going to leave it.